Om Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Gyanamurtim Dandvaititam Gagana Sadrusham Tattvama Shari Laksham Ekam Nityam Bimala Sarvadi Sakshi Bhutam Bhavatitam Triguna Rahitam Sadgurum Tan Namami. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. We salute the leader of our souls, through whose grace our ignorance is dispelled, who is beyond good and bad, happiness and sorrow, virtue and vice, and all other pairs of opposites. We recognize that one is the only witness to the changing phenomena of this universe. May we, through that grace, go beyond darkness and delusion and realize the truth in this very life. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Tat Sat. Welcome, everyone. Pleased to see all of you here on another Saturday Satsang. We'll go on doing this as much as we can and as long as we can, and also spreading the Vedanta and other darshanas of India throughout the world over these mediums that we're, you might say, limited to right now, but of course we've all been limited to the body-mind mechanism already when we took embodiment. And maybe the whole game is about breaking through some of these limitations and expressing ourselves. As one questioner said yesterday, when I answered the difference between the koshas and the akashas was the question. So I was thinking today in meditation right here in the shrine room here in Hawaii, that the Atman expresses itself through the koshas in the akashas. So it wraps itself around with coverings, 5 of them as we know, and then spreads itself through the 5 akashas and the field of the mind, as the father of yoga says, and expresses itself there. That's called lila if you're enlightened or awakened. And it's called maya if you're not. So the soul has to take its pick whether it wants to remain in pure conscious awareness and stay close to Brahman, as Shankara tells us, when it enters into the field of embodiment, or it forgets itself there and enjoys and suffers as the case may be. All these lessons are both high and low, paravidya and aparavidya, are all there, provided. All the avenues to enlightenment also, all the nadis to spiritual awakening provided to us also by the Divine Mother of the universe. And that's why we meet to question about it, to inquire, and to think about it, manana, roll it over in our minds, and come to a full realization of it in this very lifetime. So with that brief introduction, my usual preamble to get our psychological and philosophical juices flowing, then let's enter into some field of questions here, Atma Vichara, since we have a nice large group this morning, and we'll see what we come up with in the case of this Dharma, sometimes hidden Dharma. We wish it weren't so, but we want to try and make it as open and available to people as possible in this day and age, this Kali Yuga they call it. So we can bring more light into the darkness. So anyone have a question to start us rolling? Please express yourself.
All right, shall I jump in?
Please, Philpaka, save us, save us.
Yeah. So, I want to, sometimes my mind wanders when I'm trying to concentrate on the mantra. I try to remember that whatever else whatever else I find myself dwelling on is unreal. And I ask sort of Mother's assistance in refining that point of concentration. How else can I concentrate more deeply?
It would be the perfect scenario, of course, if we were born with perfect concentration, and then be able to use it for meditation and then get samadhi out of it. Those three are called samyama in yoga. And you might say the upper limbs of the tree of yoga, 6, 7, and 8, dharana, jnana, and samadhi, are culminating in samyama. And that's where you see a true yogi or a true yogini, as I was just saying, expressing the truth of the Atman. And that triple concentration, a triputi of a very high and elevated kind, would be good to enter into the embodied condition with. That is, have that as one of the qualities. But we can make sure that it will be that way in the future if we practice it in this lifetime. The teachings of karma, although relative laws, are very valuable to us inside of the flow of the river of time. And we have all entered into the river of time. Some of us are aware of it, some of us aren't. It's the only difference. Those of us who are aware of it are aware of the need to focus. Otherwise, life becomes meaningless and it doesn't end in any value to the soul. It's just like a worthless day or a worthless period of 24 hours where we don't accomplish anything and we don't feel like we've earned our valuable human birth. Remember, Sri Krishna and Holy Mother used to say that we've not come here to have fun. We and our children have come here because we know how important it is that we've gained a human birth. For Sri Krishna mentions in the Gita that there are many wombs to be born in, and we see that all over the earth. The Bhutakasha, or the Bur Loka, they've called it throughout the ages, the realm of embodied beings and solid objects and so forth. So the point of concentration, the focal point of concentration, is always, of course, the Atman for the Vedantist, or you would call it Buddha nature if you were one of the devotees of Lord Buddha. There's a beautiful Sanskrit chant that says, Donar Grahitva Upanishadam Mahastram. That's Mahastram's great, the Upanishads, how great they are, and they're teaching the truth. Sharam Hupsanashita Sanjayita. Ayam Yatad Bhavakatena Chetasa. Chetasa is consciousness. Laksham Tadevaksharam Somya Vidhi. The nectar of vid, of higher knowledge, vidya. So the English goes, taking as weapon the mighty bow furnished by the great Upanishads and other non-dual teachings. Fasten to that bow the arrow of the mind, made sharpened by thoughts on reality alone. Then, pulling full strength, release and penetrate the mark, O student, the imperishable Brahman. So the point of concentration there, of course, is thoughts on reality alone. If we can do that even 1 hour a day, it's our practice is successful. But Holy Mother has said that it's better to be in full concentration for just a few minutes than it is for the mind to wander for an hour. So you just mentioned the wandering mind. You probably have to make it an imperative and tell the mind, which is supposed to be your servant of your true self, Atman, that it needs to focus and needs to come under control whenever you sit on your asana and shut your eyes in contemplation. So you make it more of a solution than a problem, more of an answer than a question. And that's how the great souls are directing themselves all the time. They're very direct and straightforward, masterful, noble. That problematic word Arya, or the Aryan, you see, comes to mind. And it was really tortured over time. But in the original Sanskrit, the word Arya was the noble soul. So that's what we have to return to, this idea of the noble soul, which is our true nature. Even Patanjali, in terms of concentration, used to say that even 7 to 11 seconds of perfect concentration is a minor samadhi. So maybe there's 3 things there I'm saying. Try for 11 to 7 seconds of perfect concentration. And then, in Holy Mother's way of thinking, try for a couple minutes or 3 minutes of total concentration, and then go for the hour that your teacher has told you to do each day. And don't let a minute of that hour pass without something divine on your mind, whether it's full concentration on Brahman, or whether it's the vision of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother in your heart, or whether it's teachings of the Dharma told to you by your precious Dharma teacher throughout the years. Those things occupy your mind, and then your time is really made worthwhile. In fact, you can even get out of the river of time, even being in it. As Lord Buddha's last teaching was about that, how to get out of the river and sit on the banks, watch things go by, realize that everything's transitory, passing, ephemeral, rising and falling all the time. But at the same time, underneath it, supporting it all is that unoriginated mass of pure conscious awareness. It's the witness of it all, as we just chanted. So therefore, you bolster yourself up with great thoughts like that. Upanishad Mahastram. Always think of the great thoughts and the great teachings of the Upanishads, and ennoble yourself. Does that sound good, Alex? Saw you smiling when you heard that. No reason why the soul shouldn't always remain in full concentration. It would be one way of saying that. But we know the world of distractions is always vying against that. So that's our challenge, to remain undistracted.
Babaji, I have a question.
Yes, please.
How does one quell the vrittis in the intellect after they have quelled the thoughts and forms of thoughts in the manas?
How does one quell the vrittis?
Sorry, just getting closer. The obstacle that I've been coming up with in meditation is, after quelling the thoughts and forms of thoughts in one's mind, one is left to deal with the just vrittis in the intellect. At least that's what I'm perceiving. And so the question is, after one has been able to quell those thoughts and forms of thoughts, how does one quell the remaining vrittis in the intellect?
Yes, you're talking about where consciousness is vibrating
Yes.
at any given time. Yeah, well, if it's higher consciousness that you're aiming at and attaining, then of course the vibration becomes less and less. That probably has to be said. First of all, I've noticed in my teachers, for instance, when I studied them up close in the old days, Swami Sheshananda and Nitya and Lexiksen and so forth, that they were always quiet. And it seems like even when they were talking, they had a certain presence and a certain silence in their modes of of action. Like it was all based in a kind of peace that we hear about. And so when higher consciousness is in charge, it seems like everything is non-vibration. Too much trouble to open and close the eyelids, as they say, in a person like that. They just like to stay in a deep state all the time. And even when they're speaking and acting, they seem to carry that presence of economy of vibration, you might call it, sparsity of thought and economy of words. And when they are speaking and acting, it's so scoped down into a focus that it's hard to find any rough edges or any vibrations that are not laser-like, like contained in the flow of their one-pointed concentration. So that probably needs to be said first, and that's a noticeable thing on people, on awakened people like that. It's you can't help but notice it and then want to get close to it, sort of like if you're cold, getting close to a fire and warming yourself. The ignorance goes away in the fire of knowledge. But with the practitioner, the vrittis are vibrating, and it seems like what you're saying is you're noticing them in the mind as thoughts. But then when you're able to get control of your thoughts and maybe dissolve them some, that you feel a vibration going on in the intellect. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. The feeling is, if I can describe it more clearly, there's a space that kind of becomes uncovered once one has gotten rid of all the thoughts and even the forms of those thoughts or images per se in the mind. Once those have gotten rid of, there's this stillness, but it's a stillness that still seems to carry with it some vibration, and which is perpetuating that sense of separation, I guess. And that's what I'm trying to get after.
I think that's more of a bridge you're talking about than a problem. Okay. When the intellect vibrates, it's a good sign that the intellect is awake and a part of the game. In most people's process, it's just the dual mind that's going on, connected to the ego, and they're just looking for pleasures and escaping pains and going on in a very mundane kind of level. Their process of their thinking and so forth is very base or very commonplace. But when and then the thoughts get figured in, the chitta, the mind stuff, the Vedantas call it, what's going on in the head in terms of thoughts and hopes and fantasies and projections and then one notices that when the intellect begins to come into the picture, then some sort of interest in knowledge is beginning to be born, and it could be lower knowledge. We would say that would be the case in the terms of people who are focused on matter alone. Very high thinkers, scientists, biologists, archaeologists, so forth, are focused, and so they have a kind of concentration that's a part of the intelligence or the intellect. But real intelligence, living intelligence, as the yogi knows it, has not been born yet, because the focus is only upon matter. So you take that vibration that's in the intellect and you try and raise it and focus it on something that's of a higher level. People usually proceed to something of the occult nature when they begin a spiritual path. And we know that's dangerous in some ways, but it's also rather natural that people come upon powers that are in the mind. And so it's just going to be a matter of how they use those powers. If they return to the ego and mind department of their antakarana, and they begin to use those powers for harming others or for commonplace uses around attachment and pleasures and so forth, then the intellect hasn't vibrated very high, or it can't stay very high in consciousness. The finer runs of intelligence are based more towards then, after ethics and morality have been attained, then proceeding on into intellect proper, which is beginning to think about in terms of heroic nature, from the pasu, the animal, not the animal that senses only, but the animal that thinks. From pasu, then the intellect begins to focus on virya, how to help others, how to be heroic. Virya means great strength. Teja virya, great strength of teja, of mind, of intellect. Teja is a kind of light. Tejas is a kind of light that shines off of the intellect. And so if one can engender that, if one can engender that, then pretty much the vibration is becoming finer and finer. And so that's why I say that's a doorway for most people. If you've began to make a division, if you begin to discern a division between thoughts, chitta, lower thoughts, and intellect or intelligence, then that's a doorway into peace and balance. And so I would say that would be a positive way of dealing with that vibration in the intellect, is to do something with it that elevates it, that helps it to, as we were just saying in the last question, helps it to stay focused and concentrated for longer periods of time. Thoughts on reality alone is what I just chanted. So you spend more and more time in higher consciousness, call it what you will. If we can decide upon God or Brahman or Almighty Father or the Great Spirit, we can get that out of the way and just decide that that's one homogeneous mass of consciousness. Then we can get on to concentrating on what's inside that one great being, which were things like wisdom and devotion. And the mind can then have something definitive to concentrate on rather than just floating in its life or in its meditation. So specify that vibration in the intellect and refine it, raise it. Don't think about necessarily yet, think about in terms of dissolving it. That's more for your thoughts. You get up in the morning, you dissolve, you meditate, and at night you come home after work, you dissolve your thoughts. Mm-hmm. And then that shining intellect or intelligence will come through the next day. If you don't, then you're just a bunch of garbage in your mind comes through the next day. Yeah. That's how Vivekananda said it. Sri Ramakrishna told a funny story. He said, 2 men went to the temple. One saw God in the image. The other just saw a bunch of garbage in his mind. So yes, where is consciousness going to vibrate today is a good question to ask yourself each morning. And that'll help you be noble and think high and be close to Brahman.
Thank you, Babaji.
What's Nick thinking about? He's about to ask a question.
Yeah, I wanted to follow that up with, is this how to cultivate sattva in your life then? Because the gunas are always cycling and they're always going to be, or seemingly always going to be affecting that lower mind. But if you can sit in your intellect and point it directly towards your Atman, is that how you cultivate just a more pure sattva in your life so that you are less affected by the cycling gunas that are constantly going around in this world?
Well, that's very much connected to the last question too. And another way of specifying where the intellect is vibrating. There have been some questions lately about gunas. They're, as I say, sort of specific to the Vedantic path, although you find them mentioned in Samkhya Yoga, Lord Kapila at the beginning. He speaks about Trigunyam in one of the first slokas of the Tattva Samasa Sutras. So you know that it's been there in the mind of great thinkers. What I mean by great thinkers here, people who can plumb the formless, who spend time in the formless where there is no vibration. They actually, it's odd for people to think that way. Most people wouldn't, but there's a great bliss and a great peace of having an empty mind. And of course, even the expression empty mind in the West reminds us of how stupid we are and how our parents told us that we are empty-minded and everything. But then you come to a great teacher and you find out that empty-mindedness is rather the penultimate goal. And so there's a great efficacy in spending long periods of time in a non-vibrational state. And nobody would have thunk it until they actually got interested in it or got attracted to meditation or heard about Zen in the 60s and spoke to people who were having experiences of formlessness, formless meditation. Something actually happened in that formlessness, like there were seeds there and there was a great light behind it, like Sri Ramakrishna going to the wax museum and saying, that's how I see the world. That wax museum was a perfect example for him of how he saw objects. They were all made of wax, but there was a great light behind them. So that is one way of dealing with the gunas. So the great thinkers, they've looked so far back into the origin of things as far as origins go. And they've found that at the very gateway of form and formlessness, these three gunas are standing there. And if they're held in abeyance, there's no creation. That is, of course, projection. But if they're let loose, then everything is a riot of thought happens. And it happens from the cosmic mind on down into the collective mind, on down into the individual mind. The gunas become causal, then they become subtle, then they become gross. And so we have to return the favor. That is, we start at the gross, we turn it back to the subtle, and then we understand what the causal is all about. And that's how you inform the intellect. And then the intellect starts giving off all its gratitude to you in the form of higher teachings. So that's involution and evolution as far as spiritual life is concerned. And we don't see any involution anywhere else. They're not talking about it anywhere else. So we have that one great benefit to knowing about the return chain of evolutes back to the source. And it's very difficult to just jump to the source in most cases. If you're a good jumper, Sri Ramakrishna said, you can jump from the lowest step to the highest step, but you'll never know what the steps in between are made of when you make that jump. So it's better to go by avastas, step by step, from the gross to the subtle to the causal, or from your gross body to your mind, and then into your intellect or your higher intellect, where everything is held in seeds. So if we hadn't had some great souls come along, like Swami Trigunatitananda, which means the one who transcended the three gunas, then we wouldn't know it was possible. So we can't let something insentient, like the three gunas, keep us from realizing our true nature. We're to master those things. They're not to master us. The seer has fallen under the control of the seen, the father of yoga told us in 140 AD. But now we have to reverse the process again, and the seer has to be in charge of the scene. Prakriti has flowed from Purusha, not the other way around. But everything out here in the gross world is making it look like it was the other way around. So much so that there is no Purusha anymore, there's just matter. So if you're taking account of ins and outs, or beginnings and ends, involution and evolution, then there should be a purpose to that. Not just to observe it, which is one step, but to master it. And that's what yoga is all about.
Thank you.
Namaste, Babaji.
Yes.
Sorry for being late. I just, while you were talking, I had a question that I was thinking of earlier today. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you were talking about going from gross to the subtle and taking spiritual maturity by avastas, and from the thoughts to the intellect. And I want to ask about the koshas that are these the koshas that we have. Are they can they actually be experienced and seen in other people also? Recognized when one also recognizes them in themselves, and do these koshas, do they have levels of subtlety, or are they have a hierarchy? If you could talk a little bit about that, since you were talking about moving from the gross to the subtle and these avastas.
Right. It's one of the things. It's one of the things that we run across when we run across Indian philosophy. It'd be nice if we just had one religion and we just focused there and got realized, and then spread out later. But it's kind of going against the grain of what India teaches when you get into India and you find out that there are so many ways of expressing these teachings. You can call them koshas, you can call them upadhis. Tantra calls them kanchukas. And then, of course, the Advaita Vedanta and everything looks at them as false superimpositions over Brahman. So you have all these different ways of describing these layers that the human being consists of. It's like walking around like a layer cake, but the only thing you're seeing is the outer frosting and not the inner core. So in the case of koshas, the implication is coverings. In the case of upadhis, it's sheaths that you fill up. In the case of kanchukas, it's something that you use to express yourself through. So if you take all of those from Samkhya and Vedanta and Tantra and so forth, and you kind of make a composite of them, and you look at them, and then you can get a kind of grand view of what the human being is made up of on a much deeper level than, say, biology might give you, because you're into biology. That's what your major is, right? So I've often told you that the biologist who is a Vedantist would not just focus on the elements, the 5 elements, but would start to study where the 5 elements came from, like the Tanmatras, which nobody knows about in the West, where their subtle essence is. And so it's much the same way with the 5 koshas or the 5 upadhis. They're sheaths which get infilled by consciousness, and uh, you might say that the great challenge of infilling the koshas by consciousness would really become risky and problematic at the level of the physical, because what infills the body, how the mind infills the body is really, the outcome of that's really going to be predicated by what kind of consciousness, what state consciousness was in when it took on the body, and how many limitations were there, karmas, samskaras, and conditionings, colorings, tendencies from the past lifetimes. And then you'll see the result of that in the embodied condition. So if what you just said was, how do you see the koshas in other beings? Pretty much the same as you see them in yourself. But then you also know what you're dealing with by trying to, what yoga would call create nadis, channels back towards the source. It's as if you came out of the source and you took on these koshas, these coverings. Each one got a little thicker the further out you came. So we were talking about it in a threefold way last time, right? Causal to subtle to gross. Now we're talking about it coming from the Anandamaya kosha, the sheath of bliss, out to the Vijnanamaya kosha, the sheath of intelligence, then to the Manomaya kosha, the sheath of mind, then to the Pranamaya kosha, the sheath of energy, finally right down into the Annamaya kosha, the sheath of food, Annam, which everything is predicated upon here in the physical body in this lifetime. Man's life in this age is all dependent on food. Sri Ramakrishna said, direct quote from him. So the inference of that is that at other levels of consciousness, it's not predicated on physical food. And maybe in another age, people weren't so dependent on physical food. You can still see the remnants of that in the yogis today. So they eat sparsely. And minimal excretions and all of that. It's even mentioned in the Gita and in the Upanishads. So if you're coming out of finer sheaths and you're having to infill grosser sheaths with higher consciousness, that becomes the real problem of embodiment. And I think probably somewhere along the line, many people just give up. And they fall afoul, they run afoul of the samsara wheel, and they give up their consciousness and lose their human intelligence, and in that way begin to become less and less aware, less and less conscious of things. We see that all about us then today. If you're looking at other beings, other beings, Annamaya koshas, their sheaths of food, then they're eating bad foods, they're becoming overweight, they're not taking exercise, their complexions aren't clear, and on and on. And then if you look at other people's Anandamaya koshas at the other end of the scale, that's their ego. The sheath of bliss is all about the ego. So their egos are very immature, and they're attached to animalistic things, and they're very prideful and arrogant, or they feel themselves to be worthless, the two poles of the ego. And so it then becomes a study of the five koshas in other people when you look at that in yourself, and then you see what other people are dealing with in terms of limitations in life. And you get a big shock with that when you meet a teacher like Swami Sheshanandaji when I met him, or you run into a great soul like Sixten, who's entirely different than the run of people that you've been raised with and that you've seen in public and in society and at school. And then it just jars you, it awakens you, hopefully, And now you're on the track towards purifying those koshas. The way their consciousness is being expressed through a great soul like that, the koshas almost are immaterial. They almost disappear into just one consciousness. And that's a non-vibrational consciousness we were just talking about too. And the peace is with them. So if true peace is really in them, then they're almost impossible to see. They almost disappear. That's like true transparency and true levitation and true invisibility. You don't see them having to resist evil, for instance. It just doesn't occur in them. So that light of consciousness, without any veils in the way, without any coverings, or let's put it this way, the koshas have become so transparent that only light shines through them. And then that gives you a great jar and a great awakening, and it shows you what's possible. So the teaching, again, of the 5 koshas or the 5 sheaths or upadhis is very interesting. It's a good topic. When you're doing a puja in a shrine room and you've got various koshas there, you see that those are also koshas. You've got a copper vase that you've polished really well, and you pour holy water into it. Everything's very pure and done with pure actions and pure thoughts and everything. So you're looking at the picture of Sri Ramakrishna, and the frame is his kosha, and what's inside of it is an image of him, and what's behind that is pure conscious awareness reflecting through the picture, through the image. And all of a sudden, everything becomes a kosha for something else, and everything is an infilling of gross, subtle, or causal objects or thoughts or principles, because that's basically what you get at the gross level as objects. You get thoughts as objects as thoughts in the subtle state, and then you get seeds or causes in the causal state, and so you're jumping into these 3 bodies towards non-dual awareness via these 3 great steps, or through these 3 great bodies, or through the A, U, and M, the threefold matras of the word. So it becomes a very interesting study of how consciousness infills everything and then how it empties itself. And I think many of us are getting more interested in emptying. I know I am at 70 years of age. You get more interested in emptying and dissolving and returning to the source and watching the dynamics of how that works. Of course, if you have fear of death, because death is just an illusion, death is just a power in Divine Mother's kingdom that directs souls from one location to another, from one akasha to the next. And if you've seen that face to face, faced it off in your meditations, and read about it in the scriptures and contemplated it, then you don't have those colorings or conditionings in your koshas as you try and slough them off like a snake sloughs off its old skin, the scriptures say. So you become free, more and more free to explore, or maybe keep your eyes open as you die. And the Buddhists say, as you dissolve, everything dissolves into mother, for instance, you have a higher ideal, then you want to, this lifetime, I want to keep my eyes open as I die, instead of just, go into a unconscious state and wake up wherever. I want the yoga of insomnia, or the insomnia of yoga, you see. So this time I'm going to keep my eyes open as everything dissolves around me. And that'll be my conscious death. And that's necessary, according to the Buddhists and the Vedantists both, in order to have a conscious rebirth. So that's what makes a bodhisattva in Buddhism, is to have that conscious death first. So there has to be eyes open, or maybe even third eye open, for that process to take place, resulting in spiritual enlightenment. So you can see then, even from the highest standpoint, how important a teaching like the five koshas would be in explaining whatever system you want to use. It explains the dynamics of infilling and emptying, projecting and dissolving. It's what Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are all about.
Babaji, I don't know if I could ask another question, or if there's someone else who would like to ask.
Anyone else have a question?
I have a question, but Abhinaya, go for it.
No,
No,
please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I'm just adding on to my clarification of what was said earlier about leveraging the intellect as a doorway. And so as I'm thinking more about this, when we quell the thoughts and forms of thoughts in the mind, and we're now in the space of the intellect, I want to clarify my understanding, we're to leverage the intellect as a doorway to concentrate on reality and thoughts of reality alone, instead of trying to dissolve the intellect. Did I understand correctly?
Yes, and in conjunction with what we were just saying with Abhinaya's question, that's a kind of transparency that you're gaining in the intellect. There's a difference between intellect and what infills intellect. So we draw a distinction between intellect and intelligence. Intelligence is a living, sentient thing. It's the first compound off of consciousness, according to Vivekananda. Intelligence is the first compound off of consciousness. So it's the first light shining. It's the first compound of light shining off of Atman, or off of Brahman, or maybe off of the word, might be a good way of saying that. The word emanates light of wisdom, just like a sun emanates rays of warmth. And we'll talk something about that tomorrow at class, by the way, because we're returning to the Akshi Upanishad, and hope you can join that live stream in class in the afternoon, because Akshi is that point here, Akshatam, in the third eye, and the sun god gives us a lecture on that. The Rishi actually goes to the sun god and asks him about light and about intelligence. So higher intelligence then is what you're searching for, because it's just one step away from the light of awareness, pure conscious awareness. So it's an interesting question that you raise as to what happens to the intellect, and I think that's why I said that you want to make sure and purify the koshas, so that there's less in the way, so that they are doorways rather than smoke screens or something. Most people can't pass through them. Even in meditation, they have a hard time passing through to higher consciousness and just sitting there like a burning pillar. The Buddhists say you just sit in meditation like a burning pillar, and you just exude light and you burn away all impurities, and you know yourself to be that light of awareness. I am Atman, all abiding, we say in Vedanta. So the things that get in the way of that, whether they be thick membranes or whether they be wisps, foggy wisps of ignorance, and the coming and going of gunas that we were just talking about, those are all things that you have to burn through, and the best instrument for doing that, according to the seers, is the intellect. Of the antakarana, it's the most powerful tool once you get it purified and on your side for burning through all impositions, whether they have been dropped in front of you by your own self, by your own ignorance, or whether they're cosmic in design, that you have to see through something like the gunas or even through the Trinity to get to absolute oneness. You go to the Father through the Son, right? So whatever's in the way, you need to be able to have that path, that major nadi open from the Sushumna all the way from the base chakra, Muladhara, all the way to the chakra in the crown of the head, Sahasrara. And keep that channel open, and Mother Kundalini always flowing in it, and you're her son, and you're always offering to her the nectar of pure intelligence that she loves the most, and making that an offering. I put on the raiment, they say in the Old Testament, I put on the raiment of knowledge and wrapped her around me like a cloak, see, to protect me. So in all traditions, you find that an admiration of the mother wisdom and how you take to it and use that to destroy all ignorance. Krishna says that in the Gita, Nahi gyanena sudrishyam pavitram miha vidyate, tat swayam yoga samsiddhaha, kalenatmani vindate, isn't it? So basically it's that knowledge is the supreme purifier, and the wise ones realize this in due time. So you can take that knowledge that is the prize of the intellect, with the intellect purified, use it to burn through all impositions. My feeling is that if you do that, then you can meditate. If you do that, then you can love God. If you do that, then you can do selfless action. If you haven't done that, those other three yogas are impaired. Meditation doesn't go very far. Love gets waylaid, turned into sentimentalism or other things. You're loving all the wrong things in all the wrong places, and your work is always selfish. No matter what you try to do otherwise. But if ignorance is rooted out of the mind by living intelligence, that's the fire of yoga, Swami Vivekananda said. Fire of yoga burns away everything.
Thank you, Babaji.
And we have to be on time today. Is it, Annapurna? Do we have to be?
Yes, so that we can have the online ashram meeting.
Right. So that leaves just a few minutes. Maybe if Abhinaya has a quick question, we can end with that.
Yes, Babaji. I just wanted to ask. You were talking about filling in and filling in and filling out, and this how consciousness becomes and fills itself through a material form, and I wanted to try to examine this question or journey on this question. What is this connection between life and death? That some of these meditations, they kind of teach us to experience death and to go beyond death, and I kind of feel like there's a connection or some relatedness between these two opposites, life and death. If you could talk about that.
Yes, basically it's birth, life, death, and rebirth is what you're talking about. It's kind of a fourfold movement. We'll skip for now the reason for rebirth, or actually the reason for birth, because that's a very deep topic and take a long time to explore the dynamics of it. But that is, why should the soul want to separate itself out? Or why should there be any separate soul anyway? If you all look on the new website later today, if you've become members yet, you can look on that website. I'll release a new God blog, a Brahman Bite, B-Y-T-E, I'm calling it. That the title of it is Soul is Not Created. You cannot create a soul, it's a create. So you'll see Saraswati's nice image there of God creating a Franken soul, I call it a Frankenstein soul, by bolts of lightning coming from its hands and hitting its head, and then like trying to get something out of nothing or awaken a dead body like Frankenstein. So we've got a good God blog there that I'll probably release today, so you can read more about this subject. But the whole idea of birth and then life and then death and then rebirth is usually used as a description for the wheel of samsara. And there are billions and billions of souls, evidently, they say, who are rotating on that cycle of samsara. And doing so in a kind of unconscious way. Because if they did become conscious, then their life would become informed. They would use their lifetime to be informed of things. Again, the great swamis I met, their whole life was given to that 100%. What could I do but bow? When I saw that, there was just no doubt that they were living their ideal. Other people may be trying to live their dreams, see, but they were living the ideal. You have to awaken from dreams. They wouldn't want to live their dream. So to awaken from all dreams was the point there, and you saw that them living in one state of consciousness and free of all the problems that other people had during their lifetimes. And then, of course, brooding about death when it comes along the way. And so that wheel of samsara then it makes a great study. They sometimes call it the ocean of suffering, or the samsara sagara, they call it samsara sagara. But there's also ananda sagara, an ocean of bliss. Koivalya, they call that souls flow towards when they're leaving the body. And like the great rishi sitting there in meditation, and he's about to leave the body, and he says, "Oh Lord, the sun is shining on me. Please take it away, because it's a lesser light and it's veiling your greater light." So he didn't want to be on earth anymore under a physical sun. He wanted to go to the light of consciousness, and everything that was in the way had to be dissolved in order for him to do that. He had to dissipate all the tattvas, empty everything out. You took it on, now you give it up. And so if you haven't made the acquaintance of Lord Shiva yet, then it'd probably be a good time to do so sometime in this lifetime, so that you understand the power of dissolution and its importance. And you understand emptiness and its importance. And you also understand formlessness and its importance. And then when you are born again, if you should choose to do so, then you'll know the secret of formlessness all the way through your life, and then on into your next death. Pretty soon, you won't even be thinking in terms of birth, birth, life, death, and rebirth. You'll just be thinking in terms of one individual birthless, deathless awareness. And thou art that. There are a lot of things in between those two poles that I could talk about, but we've run out of time. And but it's good to look at those two opposite poles, samsara, sagara, and samsara, and ananda sagara, the two oceans that people choose to swim in. There's also a nice God blog on that if you want to look up in the new site. So we have to have a meeting with the members of that site. Please join that soon if you can, so you can take in all these new things that are happening to SRV and also support it so that we can keep doing wonderful meetings like this. So here we should end and say aloha and namaste, and wonderful to see each and every one of you here. I noticed some people I haven't seen for a long time, like Darman back there. Is that Darman way back in the back? Aloha, brother. Very good. Nice return to see you. And Vado, nice to see you. And Nick, I see you on here for the first time, I think, or practically. And Erica, they're soon to come to Hawaii, we hope. Yes, come and visit us all. And my love and blessings, however many blessings I can manage, are all upon you. And I assign you all to the care of the Divine Mother of the Universe. Namaste, Jai Shri Guru.